A few days earlier, an effeminate man smiles brightly amidst a flurry of sparkles and roses as admirers scream in adoration. Watching from behind a pillar, Cynthia silently observes the spectacle with a completely blank and unimpressed expression. Staring at him, she honestly questions her past choices. Cynthia bitterly wonders why she ever liked a man like that in the first place. Waking up in her bed with a startled expression, Cynthia suddenly remembers her past life. She realizes that the world where she lived as Cynthia until yesterday is not what it seems. It turns out this reality is actually the very romantic mobile game she had played in her previous life. Staring intensely at her reflection in a hand mirror, the shocking realization finally dawns on her. She accepts that, sadly, she has been cast in the role of the villainous, Cynthia Ludren. She notes that Eddie Doris, the person currently surrounded by admirers, is one of the game's main romance targets. As girls gossip about Eddie sacrificing himself, Cynthia recognizes her role as the interfering fiancé from his route. The onlookers continue to whisper about how pitiful his situation is. A few years ago, the Ludren family, a Viscount house, was seeing steady improvements in its territory management. Consequently, as the heir to the family, Cynthia received numerous marriage proposals. Her father gleefully tossed away the letters, rejecting the obvious gold digger attempts. Among the candidates, Eddie was chosen because she liked his unusually easygoing nature and thought they could build a good relationship. However, before long, he came to be known as a pitiful person by high society. With his sunset-colored hair and eyes, Eddie's maturing features made him look like a fragile, beautiful boy, causing his popularity among noble ladies to skyrocket. As the struggling Doris family received financial aid from hers, rumors spread that Cynthia forced Eddie into the engagement with money. Because the Ludren family only maintained superficial ties with other noble houses, they lacked the social capital to fight back. Unable to refute the rumors, Cynthia was labeled a villainess while Eddie was labeled pitiful. When jealousy toward a successful household takes precedence, even things that should proceed smoothly inevitably fail. If Eddie would just firmly deny being treated as a pitiful victim, the baseless rumors might actually settle down. Cynthia glares sharply, clearly frustrated by his utter lack of defensive action. Instead of defending her, Eddie simply smiles and thanks the girls for their concern. He pauses dramatically, baiting their attention even further. Basking in their screams of adoration, he smoothly tells them it is an honor to have such cute girls worry about him. Completely irritated, Cynthia silently fumes at his ridiculous and passive behavior. She desperately wishes he would defend her by telling them the engagement wasn't forced, but he merely smiles uselessly. Cynthia laments that the easygoing personality she once liked in Eddie has developed in the absolute worst way possible. Realizing the bitter truth, she acknowledges that the man she once admired has merely become an indecisive fool. Despite his flaws, she had once loved him devotedly and genuinely viewed him as her future husband. In the past, she even openly displayed her jealousy toward the swooning ladies who constantly surrounded him. Clinging to her misguided feelings, she had stubbornly rejected her own parents' suggestions to simply break off the engagement. All of that blind devotion lasted right up until yesterday. Disgusted by her past behavior, she wonders if some invisible force from the game had forced her to love such a pathetic man. Looking back, she knows she had simply tried her best to love her fiancé faithfully. She scoffs bitterly at the cruel irony that her faithful love earned her the title of a villainess. Deciding enough is enough, she resolves that there is no need to keep him bound to her or to endure this unreasonable situation any longer. For the sake of the Ludren family, she determines it would be far better to find a capable man who can actually support their territory as her future husband. Furthermore, she refuses to marry a coward who won't even stand up to defend his own fiancé. Realizing the engagement brings nothing but loss to her house, she decides she must consult the Doris family immediately to break it off. Although being popular isn't a crime and Eddie technically fulfilled his basic duties as a fiancé, she knows it is no longer enough. Accepting the financial consequences of her dissatisfaction, she braces herself to pay the inevitable penalty for breaking the contract. Confident in her family's support, she knows her parents will prioritize her future happiness over mere money. Staring wistfully into the mirror, she laments that she would have avoided this entire villainous trap if only she had remembered her past life sooner. With absolute certainty, she admits that she never would have chosen Eddie in the first place. Shaking off her regrets, she declares her mission to abandon the villainous role entirely and find a truly devoted man focused on the future. Pondering her new options, She begins to calculate how many unmarried noble sons are actually available. Suddenly, a cheerful voice interrupts her thoughts, asking if she thinks she will fit in at the academy. Startled by the sudden appearance of a bright-eyed girl, she pauses in shock. She instantly recognizes the captivating girl with sweet, peach-colored hair and eyes as the unmistakable center of the game's universe. With a sinking feeling, she realizes the game's official heroine has finally arrived. Although the player could name her anything in the game, she remembers that in this reality, the heroine is named Ellie. Digging through her game knowledge, she recalls that Ellie was an orphan from the slums taken in by a pitying baron. Putting the timeline together, she realizes today marks the exact day Ellie transfers into the academy to begin her story. Wondering which romance route Ellie will pursue, she remembers that every single male target comes with a doomed rival just like her. A sudden, brilliant epiphany strikes her as she widens her eyes in shock. Connecting the dots of the game's mechanics, a thrilling possibility crosses her mind. Smiling at the perfect loophole, she realizes that breaking her engagement tomorrow will leave Eddie completely free for the heroine to romance without any villainous interference. She considers that even if the heroine doesn't choose Eddie's route, at least one path would be healthier. Though initially confused by her reincarnation, she realizes that knowing the future might not be so bad if she can slightly improve the situation. She concludes that the heroine's romantic choices have nothing to do with her, resolving instead to pursue her own happiness. Stepping forward with newfound resolve, her heels clack decisively against the stone pavement. Turning her back on the past, she bids the heroine farewell and swears to pursue her own happiness. Her internal monologue is suddenly interrupted when a voice calls out her name. A girl reprimands her, demanding she respect Eddie's wishes instead of using financial aid to treat him like a slave. Cynthia silently wonders how things became so cruel, recalling the events of the next day. Confronted in the hallway, Cynthia coldly states that she isn't following the girl's logic. She directly asks the heroine what she means by calling Eddie a slave. The heroine looks at her with frustration, claiming Cynthia doesn't even realize her own cruelty. The heroine accuses Cynthia of forcing Eddie to abandon his own dreams to fulfill her selfish wishes for the sake of his family. With tears in her eyes, the heroine begs Cynthia to see how pitiful it is that Eddie doesn't even have time to talk with his friends. The emotional outburst leaves a heavy, awkward silence in the air. Cynthia is internally baffled, noting that Eddie always seems to enjoy chatting with his entourage. Though she doesn't recall forcing him to do anything, Cynthia calmly states she will confirm these allegations directly with Eddie. Dismissing the dramatic girl, Cynthia turns to politely leave the confrontation. The heroine shouts after her, accusing Cynthia of planning to threaten Eddie into obedience once again. The surrounding crowd begins to murmur, swayed by the heroine's tearful accusations. Cynthia internally admits that the heroine's terrifying ability to manipulate the narrative explains why the game's Villainous hated her. She notices with dread that the crowd of gossiping onlookers just keeps growing. Attempting to escape the spectacle, Cynthia politely excuses herself by claiming she has important business. The heroine dramatically gasps, accusing Cynthia of using her family's power to silence her. The heroine loudly declares her absolute resolve to save Eddie, confident that her righteous actions will be rewarded. Cynthia sighs inwardly, wishing she could just tell the crowd that her important business is actually breaking off her engagement with Eddie. She lets out a tired, exasperated breath at the exhausting situation. Staring at the steeled heroine, Cynthia wishes the engagement was already dissolved so she could simply send the girl away. Brushing past the girl, Cynthia formally acknowledges her feelings for Eddie but insists she truly does not have time right now. The gossiping crowd wonders if Cynthia is intentionally acting brave or just being distant by formally referring to Eddie. Walking away from the drama, Cynthia calmly concedes that she cannot blame the heroine for thinking that. Resolving to correct her past foolishness, Cynthia decides to dissolve the engagement as quickly as possible. Suddenly, a horrifying realization strikes her and leaves her visibly shocked. Raising a hand to her face, she pauses to process the gravity of the situation. She notes with absolute dismay that she is now dealing with two incredibly thoughtless people. She wonders how the heroine managed to capture Eddie's heart so quickly right after transferring into the academy. Sweating slightly, she marvels at the terrifying and reality-bending power of the game's heroine. Glancing away, she acknowledges that Ellie was the one who finally opened her eyes to the truth. She remembers all the personal goals, studies, and fun she sacrificed while enduring this restrictive life. Clutching her dress with a pained expression, She realizes just how much of her life she wasted trying to live up to his expectations. She silently questions why her true sense of self only manifested after the heroine pointed it out. Stepping forward decisively, she notes that he had never once spoken up about his own desires before this. While they were apart, she dedicated herself entirely to studying estate management, attending social obligations, and running inspections. She wonders what exactly Eddie was doing with his life during all that time she spent working. She concludes that his lack of ambition and opinions makes him completely unendearing to her now. Her eyes narrow sharply as a cold realization sets in. Breaking the silence, she formally and stiffly addresses Lord Doris. Turning to leave the chaotic garden, she calmly suggests they move elsewhere for their officially arranged discussion. She coldly assumes the Count has already informed him of the details and urges him to follow her. Completely snapping, Eddie screams that he is absolutely sick of this situation and has had enough. Clutching his chest in dramatic outrage, he refuses to attend, accusing her of planning to threaten his family with money once again. Cynthia stares at him with a perfectly dumbfounded expression, realizing he tuned everything out and doesn't even know the engagement is already broken. Pointing an accusatory finger, Eddie loudly berates her for oppressing him and arrogantly summoning a count's house as a mere viscount. Turning her back on his tantrum, Cynthia calmly explains that she summoned no one and the meeting is actually taking place at his estate anyway. Her eyes widen slightly as a brilliant tactical thought suddenly strikes her. She stares intently at the furious boy, her expression hardening into cold calculation. She realizes that if Eddie refuses to cooperate or discuss the matter properly, she can manipulate the situation entirely to her advantage. Standing before the whispering crowd, she plans to use his public slander to drastically reduce her family's engagement penalty fee. Smiling serenely at the numerous witnesses, she calmly states that her family never intended to threaten him with their financial aid. Sweating and desperate, Eddie yells that leveraging the aid money to make him obey was exactly a threat. Unfazed, Cynthia firmly declares that she has absolutely no recollection of forcing him to do anything or committing any wrongdoing whatsoever. Cynthia coldly confirms if he is demanding an immediate end to their engagement today, noting that while he felt threatened and treated like a slave, to Lord Doris, it was something else entirely. Validating his own delusion, Eddie fiercely agrees and shouts that the Ludron Viscount house treated him like a slave. Turning his back in defiance, Eddie declares he has the right to be free and vows he is done being her toy forever. Unfazed by his outburst, Cynthia smirks and tells him his impressive words give her plenty of amusing ammunition to hold against him. Suddenly collapsing to the ground in a dramatic display, Ellie begs Lady Cynthia to acknowledge her mistake and set Lord Eddie free from his suffering. Looking down coldly at the pitiful display, Cynthia merely points out that Lady Ellie's uniform will get dirty. Hearing a soft mutter, Cynthia catches Ellie whispering that Eddie already belongs to her. Flashing a wicked smile, Ellie mentally taunts Cynthia to exit the stage, declaring that a villainous deserves a bad ending and cannot beat the heroine. Struck by the specific game terminology, Cynthia stares in shock as she realizes the transferred heroine might also possess memories of her past life. Misinterpreting Cynthia's stunned silence as a threat, Eddie fiercely throws his arm out to shield Ellie. Continuing his tirade, he accuses Cynthia of acting out of petty jealousy. He demands that she immediately stop interfering with his relationship with Ellie. Pausing at his accusation, Cynthia repeats the phrase, petty jealousy, with quiet realization. She mentally acknowledges that before regaining her past memories, she genuinely held romantic feelings for Eddie. She admits to herself that she had indeed been fiercely possessive and openly jealous of any ladies who came near him. However, she refuses to let him reduce all her genuine devotion and the financial support her family provided into mere malicious torment. Staring her down with false resolve, Eddie formally declares that he has made up his mind and is ending their relationship today. Instead of crying, Cynthia simply lets out a dark, amused chuckle. Realizing there is no point in arguing with fools, she decides to exploit this perfect opportunity to her own advantage. Adopting a perfectly formal tone, Cynthia smoothly offers her apologies to the young Lord Doris. She firmly reiterates that she never threatened him and that her family's extensive financial support was given entirely out of goodwill. Warning him that his brazen words will have consequences, she announces she will bring his exact statements to today's formal discussion with his father. As the surrounding students murmur in confusion about her claims, she notes mockingly that it is unfortunate Eddie will miss the official meeting. Flashing a dangerously bright smile, She tells him she won't force him to do anything and invites him to do exactly as he wishes. The two women share a tense, knowing look as the true heroine and the self-aware Villainous silently acknowledge their war. Oblivious to the trap closing around him, Eddie happily embraces Ellie and celebrates his newfound freedom. Wishing them a lifetime of happiness, Cynthia sarcastically remarks they are perfect for each other and silently vows never to let them near her again. Turning on her heel, she excuses herself so she won't be late for the crucial discussion that will seal his fate. Later that afternoon, she hurries straight home to the Ludren estate and reports the entire disastrous confrontation to her parents. Upon hearing the unbelievable news of the young lord's foolishness, her parents sit on the sofa in absolute shock. Cynthia's parents decisively agree to dissolve the engagement, declaring that a man who hurts their beloved daughter is completely out of the question. Following a formal discussion, the engagement was officially annulled under the supervision of a state mediator. Thanks to Eddie's final blunder, things proceeded entirely in her favor, resulting in no penalty fee and the return of some past support funds. Although Count Doris put up some initial resistance, overwhelming testimony gathered within days left him with no excuses, forcing his side to give up taking it to court. Realizing the tables had completely turned, Cynthia chose to end things cleanly rather than dragging the situation out just to demand a penalty. Stretching with a relieved sigh, she notes that the Ludren and Doris houses are now complete strangers and the Doris family will face considerable hardship from here on. She coldly accepts that the Doris family will simply have to endure their new reality quietly. Gazing down at a framed photograph on her desk, she silently reflects on a fading memory of their past smiles together. Bidding a final farewell to that sunset-colored hair, she permanently closes the chapter on Eddie and House Doris. A quiet moment of sorrow passes as a single tear slips from her eye while processing the end of their history. Placing the picture face down, she resolves that they must both live lives where they never cross paths again. Snapping back to the present with determination, she realizes she must quickly find her next fiancé now that the matter with Eddie is settled. She acknowledges that being a damaged noble lady with a broken engagement is only a disadvantage if she were attempting to marry into another family. Walking confidently through the estate, she declares herself the perfect candidate for landless sons since she is her family's heir. Her previous worries about Eddie's rumors causing difficulty proved entirely unfounded as eager suitors aggressively volunteer to marry her. Slumping over her desk with an exhausted sigh, she laments that dealing with so many potential candidates is incredibly tiring. Needing an escape from the pressure, she decides to go find a quiet place to think. Strolling through the empty garden paths, she finds the effort required to judge the candidates' characters and lifestyles completely overwhelming. She desperately wishes she could just view their character settings exactly like game data. Recalling the capture targets, she vows to deliberately avoid any man the heroine might pursue. Cynthia suddenly freezes in her tracks upon spotting an unexpected figure resting in the courtyard. She expresses mild surprise upon realizing that someone is already occupying the secluded spot. Deducing that turning back now would look suspicious, she decides to just pass through quickly. Observing the lone student on the stairs, she assumes he either likes solitude or lacks friends, very much like herself. While scanning his appearance, she immediately notices his striking, beautiful silver hair. Her critical eye catches his ill-fitting, wrinkled, and slightly dirty uniform, along with unkempt bangs that completely obscure his eyes. Despite his messy and withdrawn appearance, she feels a strange, lingering sense of familiarity. The missing piece of the puzzle abruptly clicks into place in her memory. She realizes with sudden shock that this is no ordinary male student, but a specific character from her past life's knowledge. Cynthia internally panics as she accurately identifies him as the villainous third son of a ducal house who specifically appears in the Crown Prince's route. Cynthia recalls the tragic backstory of the Duke's third son, noting how he was constantly mistreated and lived a pitiful life. She remembers how his unfortunate upbringing led him to become obsessively attached to the heroine who showed him basic kindness. The game revealed him as a Yandra character who tries to claim the heroine by force before inevitably being imprisoned by the Crown Prince. If the player failed the Crown Prince's route, this dangerous boy would kidnap the heroine and trigger a forced double suicide bad ending in the sea. Staring intensely ahead, Cynthia struggles to recall the exact name of this tragic figure. Approaching the blonde boy on the bench, she finally remembers him as Sharia Brooke, the third son of a duke. Meeting his cold gaze, she is startled when he sharply addresses her as Cynthia Ludren and asks what she wants. Flinching under his intimidating eyes, She nervously assumes he is displeased that a lower-ranking noble dared to call his name. Sweating slightly, she frantically tries to concoct a believable excuse to escape the awkward encounter. Bowing her head slightly, she formally apologizes for suddenly calling out to him. A tense silence falls over them as Cynthia stares at him in apprehension. The two remain frozen in a quiet standoff on the grand stone staircase outside the estate. Maintaining her composure, she gazes steadily at the isolated boy. Sharia simply looks back at her with a quiet, unreadable expression. Covering her mouth in mild panic, she mentally berates herself for engaging him without thinking. Breaking the silence, Sharia coldly addresses her by name and asks if she needs something from him. Shrinking under his piercing stare, she realizes her lower rank makes her sudden greeting highly inappropriate. Her mind races as she desperately searches for a polite excuse to extract herself from the situation. Gathering her courage, she quickly asks for his forgiveness for her abruptness. She gently explains that she noticed him sitting alone with his head lowered. Offering a polite smile, she claims she only spoke up because she was worried he might be feeling unwell. Sweating nervously but keeping her composure, she mentally congratulates herself for coming up with such a flawless excuse. To her surprise, Sharia looks away softly and genuinely thanks her for her concern. He politely dismisses her, assuring her that there is absolutely nothing for her to worry about. Cynthia stares at him in utter bewilderment, completely thrown off by his gentle demeanor. She notes that his calm and polite behavior completely contradicts his supposed identity as an obsessive Yandra. Processing the interaction, she realizes his response was remarkably straightforward and normal. Re-evaluating her game knowledge, she remembers that the heroine actually provoked his dark side first with suggestive behavior. Her expression darkens with sarcasm as she silently judges the heroine's supposedly lovely personality. Concluding her thoughts, she decides that Sharia's backstory is simply too pitiful for him to be inherently evil. A maid tends to a baby while a blindfolded duke turns away, reflecting the grim reality that the child was born to a servant. Despite his noble status as the duke's son, the boy receives no respect and suffers poor treatment within the grand mansion. Abandoned even by his own mother, the boy grows up without a single person to care for him. He becomes a deeply tragic character, cursed to be entirely isolated and alone from the very moment he was born. Starved for familial love, the lonely young man desperately studies late into the night to maintain top grades, hoping to finally earn his father's recognition. Then, amidst his endless despair and isolation, a specific person miraculously appears. That life-changing person is none other than the game's official heroine. Beaming brightly without mocking him as an unwanted child, the adorable girl becomes the very first person to fill his void of loneliness. However, the heroine's true motive for approaching him is merely to use him as a supportive stepping stone to boost her academic ability for the crown prince route. In tragic contrast, to the lonely boy, her existence means far more than a simple academic partnership. Cynthia observes him closely, realizing that his desperate struggles in such a harsh environment perfectly explain why his eventual devotion drove him completely insane. Suddenly, the young man snaps out of his thoughts, muttering a confused reaction as he notices her staring. He stares blankly in silence, momentarily rendered completely speechless by her presence. Realizing this encounter must be a stroke of fate, Cynthia hesitantly speaks up to catch his attention. She politely asks if she might borrow a little bit of his time. She specifies that she has been wanting to speak with young Lord Brooke, the brilliant student who consistently maintains the academy's top grades. Smiling warmly, she admits she had hoped to have a conversation with him at least once. Startled by the sudden request, Brooke points to himself and asks in disbelief if she truly wants to talk to him of all people. Flashing a gentle smile, Cynthia quickly offers to leave at once if her presence is troubling him. Flustered and blushing, Brooke stammers out a denial, insisting that she is not a bother at all. Relieved by his response, Cynthia asks if she may sit beside him, to which he enthusiastically agrees. Just as she is about to sit down, Brooke suddenly panics and urgently tells her to wait. He rapidly pulls off his uniform jacket with a swift, decisive motion. Laying his jacket out on the rough stone steps, he thoughtfully invites her to sit on it instead. Blushing deeply at the romantic gesture, Cynthia thinks to herself about how incredibly gentlemanly he is. She mentally compares his devoted, hardworking, and considerate nature to Eddie's charming but flawed personality, lamenting that Eddie could never be this perfect. Recalling the game's plot, She remembers that the only reason Brooke eventually turned into a Yandra was because the heroine cruelly used him and tossed him aside. She formulates a brilliant plan, realizing that since he has no fiancé and no title, she can simply heal his wounded heart and sincerely stay by his side. She smiles with absolute certainty, convinced that this approach will turn him into an ideal husband who deeply loves his wife and grows alongside her. Thrilled by this perfect loophole, she realizes that choosing him guarantees she will completely avoid her doom as a villainous, especially since he lacks a happy ending route with the heroine. Accepting his thoughtfulness with a gracious smile, Cynthia internally resolves to use this opportunity to discover his true character. She gracefully sits on the stairs and offers to wash his uniform later before returning it. As he stares in stunned silence, she silently worries that he might not even possess a spare change of clothes. Looking up at him, she politely asks if he will not sit down. He firmly declines, stating it would be improper for an unmarried man and woman to sit too close, especially with someone like him. He thoughtfully adds that it is best to avoid any misunderstandings since she is currently seeking a new fiancé. Observing his strict boundaries, Cynthia is genuinely impressed by his sincere personality. Gazing up at his flushed face, she also acknowledges his striking handsomeness. She quickly concludes that he is truly exceptional since his deep thoughtfulness shows even in his careful word choices. Processing her words, he softly remarks that she actually knew who he was. He looks away with an embarrassed expression, admitting that his recent circumstances are nothing to be proud of. Cynthia smiles brightly and declares it an absolute honor to remember someone as outstanding as the young Lord Brooke who consistently maintains top grades. Thoroughly flustered by her praise, he frantically insists there is no need to be so formal with someone like him. Calming down slightly, he humbly admits that hearing such praise from her is a profound honor for him as well. A sudden rush of overwhelming emotion causes tears to well up in his widening eye. Cynthia softly observes the way his eyes are glistening with unshed tears. Relying on her past knowledge of the game, she easily pieces together exactly what he is thinking right now. She realizes that receiving positive acknowledgement for the very first time must be moving the perpetually lonely boy beyond words. She reflects that his raw emotional reaction is clearly not something achieved through ordinary effort. Continuing her praise, she tells him that the sheer dedication required to maintain those top grades at their academy is truly beautiful. Looking up at him with a beaming smile, she confesses her sincere admiration for his hard work. She humbly admits that even with all her own effort, reaching those top academic ranks remains incredibly difficult. Surprising her in turn, he reveals he has heard of her prudent territorial management studies and her careful planning for the future. He earnestly praises her for balancing her rigorous studies with her heavy responsibilities as the next head of her house. Cynthia is left utterly stunned that a man would so naturally respect her efforts instead of dismissing her as an impertinent female heir. Deeply moved by his genuine validation, she stammers out a heartfelt thank you. Flustered by the unfamiliar praise, she nervously touches her cheek while assuming her face must be completely red. She anxiously wonders if her voice was trembling as she spoke. Desperately needing to change the subject, she blurts out that his silver hair is so beautiful when catching the sunlight that she couldn't help but stare. His eye widens in absolute shock as her sudden, glaring compliment strikes him straight in the heart. Sharia looks away nervously and asks if she found his white hair unpleasant. Startled by the sudden question, Cynthia simply stares back and utters a confused sound. Recovering her composure, she asks what he means and firmly states she has never found it unpleasant. Sharia explains that he was told his old man-like white hair was unsettling when he was removed from her list of potential fiancés. Completely blindsided by this revelation, Cynthia exclaims in utter shock. She mentally panics, recalling that she looked through every single marriage proposal and never saw one from him. Frowning in thought, she wonders if her parents hid the proposal on purpose, though she doubts they would do such a thing. Sharia clarifies that he was never even raised as a candidate, referring back to when she was only 10 years old. He adds that it was after that time when Eddie Doris, the Count's son, was officially chosen as her fiancé. Understanding finally dawns on Cynthia as she realizes he is talking about events from years ago. She admits that as a young girl charmed by Eddie's gentle personality, she failed to properly consider the other young lords. However, her expression sharpens as she realizes that even her youth doesn't explain this misunderstanding. She firmly declares that she has never once thought Lord Sharia's hair was unpleasant. Looking incredibly determined, she swears that she has never said any such hurtful thing. Realizing his brothers must have been mocking him with lies, Sharia apologizes for bringing up something so strange. Cynthia clutches her chest painfully, realizing exactly what kind of cruel treatment he has suffered at home just from that resigned reaction. She recalls from her game knowledge that his silver hair was a trait inherited from his mother. She remembers his tragic setting, where the people of the ducal house constantly mocked him for his appearance. Flashing a brilliant smile, Cynthia tells him that she finds his silver hair to be incredibly beautiful and lovely. She gently explains that her parents' hair has started to show white, and mixing it in as an accent color looks quite elegant. Continuing her warm encouragement, she predicts that if white strands ever mix into his silver hair in the future, it will be wonderful. She beams at him, promising that he will become a very charming older gentleman with hair like sparkling, shining snow. A stunned silence falls over the staircase as Sharia stares at her in absolute awe. Overwhelmed by her genuine compliment, he blushes furiously and covers his lower face. Still blushing deeply, he softly thanks her with a genuinely touched expression. Watching his flustered reaction, a sudden realization clicks into place for Cynthia. She happily concludes that beneath his supposed Yandere exterior, he is actually a very adorable person. Suddenly, rushing footfalls echo nearby as a voice calls out to the Lady Viscountess. A young man arrives panting heavily and quickly apologizes for being late. Cynthia turns toward the newcomer, her face breaking into a bright and welcoming smile. Blushing softly, a handsome young man flashes a gentle, captivating smile. Looking back, she notes that their unexpected encounter took place right there in the serene back garden. Following that fated meeting, the two consistently promised to see each other the next day, repeating their rendezvous over and over. Standing close together, they share a quiet, intimate moment as he gazes down at her. Noticing the folded cloth in her hands, Brooke curiously asks his lady what she brought. Holding up the patterned blanket, Cynthia cheerfully acknowledges his question. She warmly reminds him that every time they met on these stone steps, he gallantly laid down his own jacket for her. Unwilling to let him keep sacrificing his uniform, she reveals that she brought her own cushion to sit on from now on. Looking slightly dejected by her preparation, Brooke softly mutters his understanding. Confused by his sudden shift in mood, Cynthia tilts her head and wonders what is wrong. Turning his head away to hide his expression, he quickly denies that anything is the matter. Internally, he laments that her independence leaves him with nothing left to do for her. Realizing the depth of his earnest nature, she mentally swoons while he quietly admits to feeling a little lonely. Reflecting on another recent encounter, she remembers a day she ran late and found him waiting patiently in the pouring rain with an umbrella. Hurrying toward him through the downpour, she called out his name. Apologizing profusely for keeping him waiting, she explained that her conversation with the teacher had unexpectedly run long. Sharing the shelter of his umbrella, he sighed with relief and told her how glad he was to see her. Blushing deeply, he shyly confessed his fear that she might not have come to meet him at all that day. Struck by his vulnerability, her heart pounded so violently that she nearly short-circuited. Completely overwhelmed by his sweet confession, she desperately held back a strange squeak of affection. Stealing a quick, nervous glance, she tries to compose herself. Meeting her eyes, he offers another breathtakingly gentle smile. Returning to the present, she marvels at how perfectly their conversations flow, praising his thoughtful opinions on both studies and territory management. Impressed by his capability, she recalls hearing that he even expertly assists with the ducal family's endless paperwork. Enjoying their endless chats, she realizes she never grows bored in his presence. Yielding to her growing feelings, she admits that the more they talk, the more powerfully she is drawn to him. Calculating his incredible potential, she visualizes how perfectly he would help protect the Ludren household's territory if he became her partner. Gazing at a vision of their shared future, she imagines them as a deeply supportive couple, just like her own beloved parents. Smiling with quiet certainty, she acknowledges that despite their brief acquaintance, she can easily picture spending her life with him. Comforted by his warm presence, she silently vows to keep seeing him, eagerly anticipating their meeting tomorrow. Cynthia internally confesses her deep desire to keep talking with him like this forever. Breaking the comfortable silence, she softly calls out Lord Brooke's name. She asks him directly if it is troublesome for him that she invites him out every single day. Flustered by the sudden question, Brooke frantically denies it. He insists with absolute certainty that spending time with her would never be a bother. His expression suddenly shifts into one of deep, self-deprecating seriousness. Looking down nervously, he asks if she doesn't find it boring to talk with someone like him every day. Cynthia violently rejects his insecurity, declaring that being bored by him is absolutely impossible. She passionately insists that there simply isn't enough time to enjoy his company. Desperately wanting to hold his hand, she forces herself to hold back since they are not officially engaged yet. Calming down slightly, she warmly assures him that talking with him is truly very enjoyable for her. Blushing softly, Brooke smiles and asks her what they should talk about today. She immediately counters by eagerly wondering what they will talk about tomorrow. Stepping closer, she confesses that waking up and thinking about talking to him warms her heart. Completely overwhelmed by her proximity, a heavily blushing Brooke nervously points out that she is standing a bit too close. Ignoring his flustered state, she steps even closer and demands he promise to continue meeting her. Brooke completely freezes up, his face burning bright red under the intense pressure of her closeness. Staring at his flushed face, Cynthia mentally swoons over his adorable reaction and wishes his bangs weren't hiding it. Yielding to her overwhelming presence, he stammers out a quiet promise to keep meeting her. Satisfied with his answer, she smiles gently and accepts his word. She internally continues to gush over how incredibly innocent and adorable he is. She openly expresses her profound happiness that he made that promise. Beaming with joy, she tells him that she is already looking forward to tomorrow. Brooke blinks in mild surprise at her enthusiastic statement. He gently begins to correct her excited planning. Cynthia is left completely stunned when he reminds her that tomorrow is actually a day off. Deeply embarrassed by her eager blunder, she apologizes and admits she was just too excited for their time together. Looking away with a shy blush, Brooke softly confesses that he feels the exact same way. Recovering her composure, Cynthia suggests they meet again next week in the same place, to which he happily agrees. They bid each other a fond farewell until the following week. Staring downward with a darkened expression, Sharia stands alone in heavy silence. Back in her room, Cynthia flops dramatically onto her bed with a heavy sigh. She buries her face deep into her patterned pillow to hide her frustration. Sighing again, she complains that her days off are supposed to be far more enjoyable than this. Gripping the fabric tightly, she admits that simply not being able to see Sharia makes her day unbearably boring. Rolling over to stare blankly ahead, she silently wonders what he is doing right now. Gazing softly, she reflects on how surprised she is to have grown so attached to him in such a short time. She questions if her urgency was merely because she was rushing to find a new fiancé after breaking her engagement with Eddie. Looking back at their meeting on the steps, she confesses that her initial decision to speak to him actually involved calculated motives. Smiling warmly at the memory of his face, she realizes she would have been drawn to him regardless of her original intentions. Sitting up and hugging her pillow, she anxiously wonders if she is the only one who desperately wants to see him. She logically reminds herself that his promise to meet her every day does not guarantee he has romantic feelings. She knows his home life is terrible and that he has very few people who treat him with basic decency. Looking down with a pained expression, she considers the depressing possibility that he only talks to her because he is starved for conversation. Suddenly, her eyes snap wide open as a horrifying realization pierces her thoughts. Clutching her chest in mounting panic, she remembers that he is trapped with his heartless and abusive family at this very moment. Overwhelmed with worry, she desperately wishes she could run to see him right away. Without hesitation, she lunges forward and aggressively grabs her door handle. A sudden dose of reality hits her and freezes her entirely in her tracks. Slumping against the closed door in utter defeat, she painfully accepts that she cannot just barge into a duke's estate since she isn't even his fiancée. Pressing her face against the cold wood, she whispers his name in deep distress. Her mind races with anxious thoughts about whether he is currently feeling sad or losing his confidence. She vividly recalls how his mature and handsome face transforms when he flashes that adorably shy smile. The terrifying thought that his beautiful face might be wet with lonely tears torments her. Closing her eyes tightly, she fiercely wishes for nothing more than to see him keep smiling. Clutching her dress with absolute resolve, she decides she wants to be the one who makes him happy. Blushing deeply, she struggles to put a name to this overwhelming and unfamiliar feeling. A sudden knock abruptly interrupts her thoughts as a maid calls out from the hallway. Quickly recovering her composure, she turns and asks the servant what is going on. Apologizing for the intrusion, the maid informs her that the Viscount and Viscountess are summoning her. Agreeing to the summons, she turns and begins walking down the hallway to answer her parents' call. Opening the heavy doors, she nervously asks her mother and father why they sent for her. Greeting her with a warm smile, her father adjusts his glasses and happily welcomes her into the room. He gestures toward the comfortable sofa, inviting his daughter to take a seat with them. Beaming cheerfully, her mother encourages her to enjoy the freshly prepared tea with plenty of sweet honey. Taking her seat, Cynthia reflects on how she shares the striking red hair and eyes of her loving parents. She notes that many in the Ludren family inherit these vivid crimson features due to a long history of marrying within the lineage. Accepting the teacup with a graceful bow, she feels a deep surge of pride in her noble, crimson heritage. She gazes fondly at her parents, incredibly grateful that they envelop her in warm love without a single displeased expression despite the worry her recent engagement annulment caused them. Thinking of her newfound academic companion, she wistfully hopes that Brooke could experience the warmth of such a kind family. Her attention returns to the table, where delicious-looking sweets and their usual specialty honey sit waiting. Sipping the fragrant brew, she quietly savors the tea flavored with honey from their land, knowing that beekeeping and carbonated hot springs are the territory's main sources of income. Suddenly, she pauses mid-sip as she notices her parents staring at her with highly expectant, knowing smiles. Leaning forward, her father teasingly points out how happy she seems lately and asks if she has a special secret to share. Breaking into a nervous sweat, Cynthia realizes in a panic that they have already figured out about her daily meetings with Brooke. Her mind races as she frantically debates whether she should continue keeping him a secret or finally tell them the truth. Refusing to hide things from the precious family who worried so much about her, she bravely confesses that there is someone she is interested in. Blushing deeply, she explains that she talks to this academy student every day, describing how their time together feels wonderfully joyful yet painfully fleeting. Lowering her gaze shyly, she admits that spending her days like this leaves her wanting nothing more than to be by his side. Finished with her confession, she looks up in confusion when her parents offer absolutely no reaction. She anxiously stares at them in the quiet room, wondering if her sudden romantic revelation was simply too much for them to process. Breaking the silence, her parents exchange a delighted glance and express their profound relief that she has finally found happiness again. Cynthia's eyes widen in sheer shock at their incredibly supportive and understanding response. Smiling tenderly, her father explains how deeply relieved they are that her heart didn't break during the annulment, acknowledging the hidden pain she bravely masked. Looking down at the floor, she remembers how she forced herself to act strong and hide her weakness, believing that the future Viscount couldn't let a broken engagement destroy her. Gripping her dress tightly, she thanks them with a trembling voice, deeply moved by the realization that they were quietly watching over her the entire time. She chides herself for finding it so difficult to show weakness, knowing perfectly well that her parents would have accepted her no matter what happened. Picturing a warm vision of Brooke standing happily alongside her parents, she desperately wishes he could be there to share in this loving moment. Reflecting on her past mindset, she admits she once resolved to enter a loveless marriage purely to secure a capable man who could manage their territory. Smiling softly, she realizes her desires have completely shifted, longing now to build a supportive, loving marriage exactly like the beautiful bond her parents share. Staring with bright determination, she firmly declares her desire for a marriage filled with nothing but true love. She mentally reviews her chosen candidate, noting that he is Sharia Brooke, the third son of the Brooke ducal family. Pondering the Brooke ducal family, she clearly recalls that he had actually sent her a proposal during her very first engagement. She reflects on his dark past, acknowledging the vicious rumors that painted him as a violent delinquent and a lazy brute before he entered the academy. However, she notes that his remarkably diligent lifestyle and ability to maintain top grades after enrolling quickly proved those terrible rumors completely false. Looking up at the academy, she acknowledges just how incredibly difficult it is to reach the top ranks and consistently maintain that position. Realizing what his sheer effort implies, she joyfully concludes that he must be a wonderful person and undeniably the boy who makes her heart flutter. Letting out a soft sigh of relief, she smiles warmly upon realizing that her parents do not seem to have a bad impression of him at all. Gazing toward the future, she feels confident that her family will surely accept Sharia at this promising rate. Despite her optimism, a wave of anxious uncertainty washes over her as she remembers she still hasn't confessed her feelings or discovered how Lord Brooke truly feels about her. Recalling her parents' supportive words, she remembers them expressing their desire to meet him in person and suggesting she invite him to the estate if he agrees. Her mother smiles warmly, sincerely wishing her beloved daughter the best of luck with the invitation. Beaming with profound gratitude, Cynthia happily agrees with her supportive parents. Looking up at the clear sky, she earnestly prays that her bold plan will succeed. Clenching her hands with deep resolve, she swears to give the lonely Sharia the warm, loving family he truly deserves. Smiling with quiet but unbreakable confidence, she realizes that having him by her side will allow her to become an even stronger person.